Joining us for business structures and making the best choice. Today we have Kevin McCardle with us from Company McCardle and Randall right here in Loudville, and he's going to go through the different business structures that you can choose when starting a business. Kevin?
All right, thank you, Jenna. Hello, everybody. The business structure choice is kind of the first choice that an entrepreneur makes, and there's a lot of forward thinking that goes into making that choice. What I'm trying to present to you today is options, 5 or 6 different options that you can choose, and try to present some pluses and minuses for each one of those options. We're just going to walk through them one step at a time, and Jenna's going to kind of throw some questions at me. In fact, I have some questions here that we hidden away, and she's going to fire some questions at me, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. I will emphasize one thing, though, and that this is an introductory program. Each one of these options can be specifically tailored to individual circumstances, and I guess with that caveat, we'll get started. On the screen now, you're seeing a list of options on there. The do nothing option, which is always the first choice, just don't do a thing. The second option is a kind of a variation on that, and that's just basically a doing business as, filing a certificate. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then there's the third choice on there is the partnership. And I really was emphasizing there when I say partnership, what's called a general partnership. There are other types of partnerships as well. There are limited partnerships. We'll talk about those a little bit. There are professional partnerships, and so there's some variation within that option as well. Corporation is option number 4. That also has a variety of different options that you can use. We're going to talk a little bit about a subchapter S corporation, because that has some tax consequences, and then the limited liability company, and that's kind of the new kid on the block that was invented fairly recently in New York State, and we'll cover that in a little more detail, I think, than some of the others. All right, let's look at do nothing. Do nothing. In the legal world, we tend to give big words to every little thing, whether they need it or not. So we call the do nothing option a sole proprietor. So if you're just out there on your own doing business, that's what you are. You're a sole proprietor. You're sole. You're all by yourself, and you're a proprietor. So you own the business, and it's your business. Pluses and minuses in there. The taxes, you're taxed at an individual tax rate that is set by New York State and the federal government. The plus in there is you can deduct any expenses that you have for your business, like a home office kind of thing is a good example of that. The next column is the one to be scared about, or the one to be nervous about. Don't be scared, but be nervous, or be planning. And that's personal and unlimited liability, because there's no curtain between you and the people you're doing business with, and the customers that come into your shop and that kind of thing. It's basically, it's you. So you're on the hook for everything that happens. So just beware of that. And obviously the expense column of doing nothing is nothing. So it's a common choice. People set up a business and they tend to start off that way, and then as their business becomes a little more successful, or a little the traffic increases, that kind of thing, then they start thinking about maybe I should think about liability or think about tax consequences and that kind of thing. And that's when you get into the planning. So it's easy to move from a sole proprietorship to any one of these other options. But let's go on to option number 2. The DBA, this is really putting a label on a sole proprietorship is all it really amounts to. The DBA is a doing business as certificate. That certificate is filed in the Lewis County Clerk's office. It's a simple form. You don't need to go to a lawyer to do that. And I think you can get the form actually from the county clerk. You can also download it from almost any place on the internet. basically has some very simple amounts of information, names, addresses, and whatever the name of the business is going to be as well. So if you got some clever name, and then you put that in there. And what the purpose of that is, it's just letting people know that if they're doing business with a particular entity that's got signs out and all that kind of thing, this is to let them know who's behind that entity, who is really the owner behind the certificate of this business. The tax consequences are the same as if you were operating on your own. It is a sole proprietorship. It's taxed at the individual rate. You can deduct business expenses. Liabilities, again, it's personal and unlimited. So it's not just what you may have put into the business, it's everything that you have, because it's a big concern. Expenses, there's not much there. You file the certificate with the county clerk's office and the filing fee is $25.
And is that a one-time fee?
It's a one-time thing. It lasts forever, well, as long as you do. It's a lifetime document because it's for your life, but it is it's a one-time fee, right? And that's it. Partnerships. Partnerships are a really common entity. They kind of evolve when there's more than one person setting up a business. It might be a husband and wife, it might be a business partnership, might be any number of combinations of people, but when there's more than one person involved, you go to a partnership. A couple of thoughts regarding the partnership, just to go through the columns that are on the screen there. The first one is taxes, and when I say taxes, I'm referring to income taxes, like state income taxes, federal income taxes, that kind of thing. And a partnership is what's called a pass-through, which means that the income that the partnership makes passes through the partnership and goes to the partners. So the partnership itself doesn't pay any taxes. It's not taxed at the partnership level. Partnership does have to file a partnership tax return. It's what's called an informational return. And that's basically telling the IRS or the State Department of Tax and Finance what the income was and also how much was reported to each partner. And that's where the K-1 comes into place. The K-1 is the report that the partnership sends to the IRS and to the state saying, this partnership made this much money and distributed that money to the partners, or losses too. It can, if your partnership takes a loss, the losses would be distributed. Then the loss could be offset against other income that the partner might have. But it's a pass through. It's not the money passes through the entity and doesn't get taxed at that level. Liabilities. Liabilities, each partner has an unlimited liability because you are, the partnership is not a separate legal entity. It's basically a collection of people working together to form a business, but it is not a separate entity unto its own. So each one of those partners is liable for what happens in the business. And it's unlimited, it's personal, so that's something to be aware of. The next slide is going to talk about a limited partnership, but for now we're talking about what's called a general partnership, and that's unlimited personal liability. One of the liabilities or downsides to a partnership is management issues. It's not always clear who's in charge. It's not always clear as how decisions can be made. So there can be disputes in a partnership. If everybody gets along fine, it's like a family. It works really well. If it doesn't, the people don't get along and they can't make decisions together, then you fall into the last bullet on the liability column, and that's the bullet about the dissolution. This comes into play when a partner passes away or wants to get out of a business. It can also come into play if the partnership is simply not functioning. The parties aren't able to make a decision. They can't decide whether to buy a piece of equipment or sell a particular product or that kind of thing. In that situation, one party can just say, I'm fed up with this mess. I want it dissolved. And there's a legal process to do that. You go to court, you file basically like an irreconcilable differences petition, and the judge will basically order everything to be sold and distributed. It's a complicated, messy procedure. So expenses, there really aren't any real legal expenses here. By that I mean filing fees. The partnership agreement is a really, really good idea. That's going to address a lot of these management issues, like who's going to be in charge. Maybe a particular person can handle the banking, another person handles the sales and that kind of thing. You can divide up responsibility that way. You can divide up how the income and the losses are distributed. There's a lot of things that you can handle within a partnership agreement. And then the county clerk certificate is that's actually probably it's a supposed to do. A lot of people don't even know that it exists, but a partnership is supposed to file a certificate. It's kind of like a DBA certificate. It just says we've got a partnership here. These are the members of the partnership. And again, it's to let the world know who this business really is. So if a partnership is out there doing business as, I don't know, McCardle Brothers Plumbing, then in that circumstance, they would want to know who the McCardle Brothers Plumbing is, and my brother and I would be on the partnership certificate. A lot of people forget that, but it is a requirement. You're supposed to do that. So the big expense there would probably be drafting the partnership agreement and consulting with somebody about how to do that.
And would you go to a lawyer for that? Or?
Yes, for you can go to a place like LegalZoom, and they would have standard partnership agreements. They have partnership agreements geared towards New York State, all 50 states. But I would recommend if you do that, at least have a lawyer look it over for you just to make sure that it is it's what you want. You can also start from scratch by talking to an attorney as well.
Okay.
How are we doing time-wise? Does it make sense so far?
Yeah, we're good.
Am I talking too much?
No, it's very informative.
Okay. Okay. Right. Limited partnerships. We've talked about partnerships a bit. A limited partnership is a different animal. Partnerships, of course, have been around since probably caveman days, where two guys or I don't want to think two cave people, let's say that, two cave people agreed to go out and hunt mammoths together or something like that. But a limited partnership is a slightly different animal, and it's relatively new. What that is you have a group of people coming together, but one of the partners is going to be kind of in the background, and it's really just putting in capital, putting in some money or some equipment or something like that. And they're not going to be actively running the business so much. They're just going to put some money in. And because they're not going to be active in the business, not going to be part of the decision making, they just want to put some assets in and take profits out. So that's their limitation. They have kind of a bubble around them. So the limited partner is not personally liable. Limited partner is only liable to the extent of the investment that the partner has made. So if you look at the column on there, or these columns on the bullets on our slide, the taxes are staying the same. It's a pass-through. The income's passing through the partnership. Partnership isn't paying any taxes. The partnership tax return is filed, and then the K-1 is distributed to partners, including the limited partner. The only real difference that you see there is on where it says liabilities, it says unlimited and /limited. Unlimited are the general partners. So most of the partners in that business are going to be general partners, but there might be one or two that are limited partners. Maybe a kind of an investor would be what it is. This person wants to put money in, and as it thinks that they've got a good idea, doesn't really want to put any sweat equity in there, just wants to basically reap the benefits of your successful business. And they don't want to take any risk at all, so they become a limited partnership. That can work pretty well. It's in the right circumstances. It's not always easy to find a can we say sugar daddy anymore? If you can find a sugar daddy out there that will be an investor like that, but that would be that kind of circumstances. If you can find somebody willing to throw in a chunk of money and then they're limited as far as liability goes.
We all hope for that.
Right, right. So we'll move on to the next slide, I guess.
Anything difference on, let's see, the Secretary of State certificate? Is that?
Oh, right. A limited partnership does have some different filing fees. I should have caught up with that. Yes, the part there's instead of filing with the county clerk's office like a DBA certificate, this one is filed with the Secretary of State in New York. Then there's a filing fee for that. It's not a lot of money. I think it's about $100. And then there's a publication requirement too, which means you publish a notice that we've set up a limited partnership, and you do that for 6 weeks in a local newspaper. So,
okay. And does that have to be proven through as you file to the Secretary of State?
Yep.
Okay.
Which after the publication is done in the newspaper sends you an affidavit saying we really and truly published this notice for 6 weeks, and then you have to send that affidavit of publication to the Secretary of State's office as well. Right. Corporations. Okay, corporations. I added the phrase up there at the top, separate legal entity. So what we're doing with a corporation is we're creating a new person, a new legal person. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the United States Supreme Court has determined that corporations basically are people, and they have rights like a person does. In that case, it had to do with money and politics and that kind of thing. But that's what that's all about. Now, corporations have been around for a long, long time. The traditional view of what was the first corporation is what's called the Dutch East India Company. If you remember back into like 7th grade social studies or something like that, you might have studied that. They were a big company that went all over the world and invested in a bunch of things and tea and who knows what they were trading in back in those days. Some not good things and some good things, but they were a real corporation. They had a charter, sort of like a certificate of incorporation. The charter was issued by the Queen, and they also had investors that put money in. Those were the shareholders, and then they had a board of directors that ran and decided where their ships were going to go and all that kind of stuff. And they're viewed as being the first real business corporation, was the Dutch East India Company. Trivia, in case you're out at a party sometime. Okay, so going through the corporations part, the taxes, tax consequences is because it's a separate legal entity. It pays its own taxes. It files its own tax return. It pays its own taxes. It's taxed at what's called the corporate tax rate, which is less than the individual rate, which might seem, wow, that's really a good break. However, that income that comes from things like dividends that's distributed from the partnership to the individuals, those are taxed again at the individual rate. So the problem with corporations is what they call double taxation. The corporation pays a tax, kind of a friendly, the lower rate than people, but then it gets taxed again at the individual's rate. So that's the big drawback to a corporation. The exception to that is that the last bullet on that side is the subchapter S corporation. Subchapter S corporation is set up as a pass-through so that it doesn't pay corporate taxes. It has real restrictions on it that I can't go into right here because I don't know what they are. But the real restrictions have to do with the types of people who are, the types of entities that are investors. There's a limited number of them. They all have to be individuals, not businesses, that kind of thing. So it limits your ability to function. But I think it's, again, subchapter S was an evolution in the corporate world to allow a small business to be set up without having to face the double taxation. Subchapter S is part of that. Subchapter F is a part of the IRS code, and it was set up to help small businesses avoid the double taxation consequences. The liability issue is limited liability. So that means that the shareholders who invest their liability is limited to their contribution. So whatever they put in, that's at risk, sort of like in the limited partnership, but that's all that's at risk. So because they're not really necessarily part of the day-to-day operations kind of thing. So just as with the Dutch East India Company, people who put money into that, they could lose that, but they couldn't lose their homes and that kind of thing, because that's the whole purpose of this, is to get investment in, put that at risk, but that's where the risk is limited to just that investment. Expenses, the process of setting it up is a little bit complicated. You have to file a certificate of incorporation with the Secretary of State's office in Albany. It's really simple. You can do it online, do it with a credit card online. You can do it instantly. You can be a corporation half an hour from now. It's really simple. Or you can pay a lawyer to do it, and it'll take longer. It'll be slower. But don't tell any lawyers I said that. You should put together bylaws and then keep track of your annual minutes. If you're really serious about it, you should get what's called a corporate minute book. And that is a book that shows that you were properly organized. It allows you to keep all your documentation in one place. And what it does is it reminds you to have an annual meeting and this kind of thing, because if you fail to have an annual meeting and fail to actually function as a corporation, then in that circumstance, your corporation can be dissolved. It's like it never existed. It's called piercing the corporate veil. So if you set up a corporation with 3 or 4 or 5 investors, something like that, and then you never have another meeting, and then there's some liability issues, that and person is suing the corporation, they do what's called piercing the corporate veil, which means getting all the way through to the shareholders, because it was never really a corporation. It never did what it was supposed to do. So it's not hard to do, but you need to make sure that you stay up with that. Just a couple notes on management there regarding the corporation. It's a board of directors, and it's shareholders. So and that can be 1 person, 2 people, that kind of thing. It's not really complicated, but it can become more complicated. It's a kind of a flexible business, so that it can really accommodate 2 or 3 people, but it can also span into a giant company like Google or General Motors that has millions of investors, and then a large board of directors, and also lots of officers that are functioning as well. So management is, again, flexible, but it's a long-standing entity. Corporations have worked for a long time. That Dutch East India was set up in 1600, and that's what, 500 years ago. So a corporation business plan has been around for a long time. So,
is there an oversight entity that makes sure that you're doing all these things that you're supposed to be doing?
That's a good question. No, there isn't. It would basically come and bite you, but only if you get involved in a lawsuit, and then the court would be the oversight agency, basically saying you're supposed to have an annual meeting, you didn't do that. You're supposed to keep bylaws up to date, you didn't do that. You're supposed to elect officers, you never did that. So that can get you in trouble.
Okay. You really got to stay on top of it.
Right.
By yourself.
Now, the limited liability company, it's a relatively new creature since 1994. You probably figured out I'm very, very old, so that seems like relatively recent history to me. In 1994, New York State enacted its limited liability company law. We weren't one of the first states to do it, but we, somewhere towards the end, other states kind of experimented with it first, but then New York kind of took the best of all the other options and really has a pretty solid limited liability company law. And it's a new creature. It's a separate legal entity like a corporation, but the corporation had that double taxation issue. So what the limited liability company was designed and basically does, that gets you the advantages of a corporation, meaning a separate entity, limited liability, that kind of thing. But it's a pass-through entity like a partnership. So you get the tax benefits of a partnership plus the limited liability of a corporation. So it has the two big pluses going for itself right there. So again, it's a pass-through entity, meaning that it doesn't pay taxes on its own. Instead, the income that flows into it is then distributed, and a K-1 is filed. It's a form that's filed with the IRS and the state telling them how much that was distributed. And then the distributions are taxed only once, and they're taxed at the individual level. Just as a piece of trivia, at the last tax cuts that President Trump put into place, there was actually a provision sort of hidden in there that allows income from LLCs to be taxed at a slightly lower rate than the individual rates. So it was intended to make corporation, by the LLC income treated similarly to corporations, because corporations pay that lower tax rate. So they finagled something in there. It's too complicated for my brain to figure out. But when you file your taxes and you get your income comes from an LLC, you'll get a little extra tax break in there, and you can thank President Trump if you want to for that. So liabilities is the middle column again, and it's no personal liability for investors. Now, obviously, if you're a sole member LLC and you're out there every day, I don't know, whatever business you're operating, you're running a bar or a restaurant or whatever, that kind of thing, and you're serving drinks that make people sick or something like that, you're not going to be free from liability for something you did personally. However, if an employee did that, you're not going to be personally responsible, because the LLC is going to be the veil of the liability is going to end there. So it's going to protect you, but not if you do the actions yourself. Expenses to forming an LLC, it's pretty standard. Articles of organization, which you file in Albany, it's a $200 filing fee. The big expense is publication. You have to publish like the limited partnership, you have to publish for 6 weeks in a newspaper. It's really don't see the point of that, because number one, nobody reads legal notices in newspapers, and nobody reads newspapers anyway, except me. So I don't really know why that's still in there, but then you have to file what's called a proof of publication, which is something you get from a newspaper showing it was really published. And then recently, New York State started requiring something called a biennial statement, which means biennial means not like twice a year, it means every other year. You have to file a statement. And the way that works is they send you a notice, either by email or a letter, saying, do you still exist? And if you do, you kind of check a box, send them $9, and you go back in. If you don't exist anymore, you can check another box, and they'll just take you off the list of LLCs. I think the reason they did this is because there were lots and lots of LLCs formed, and a lot of them just don't function. So they're trying to kind of get rid of a whole bunch of LLCs that are just not, they're zombie LLCs, so to speak. The formation process is about $1,000. And if you add in the filing fees, plus the publication fees, plus the attorney's fees for putting it all together. Again, you can go on the website of the New York State Department of State, and you can fill out the forms yourself, and you can file them yourself. That's fine. The articles of organization are very standard. The operating agreement is the next bullet down there, and that's the really important thing. That's like a partnership agreement. And what it's saying is how you're going to allocate profits and losses, how we're going to handle membership changes, like what happens if a member wants to come in, you want to add a new member, what are the rules? And you have to approve them, they have to be put in so much money, that kind of thing. And what if a member wants to get out, or a member dies? You have to put that kind of thing in there too. And it also tells about how to make decisions, like who has the authority to handle big decisions, like buying real estate, that kind of thing. So there's a lot that goes into the operating agreement. It should be a fairly thorough document that addresses any potential issues that might come up. And again, I would recommend that you have an attorney go through that with you. And operating agreement should also be tailored to your business, so that if you're a bar or a restaurant, that's one type of an operating agreement. And if you are selling goat, cheese, there would be a different kind of partnership or operating agreement. So I've kind of run out of things to say. Do you have any more things that I should have said or didn't
I
say?
think that is a great overview. I'm going to
Okay.
share your contact information here. I hope that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. I like the logo on there too. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay. So feel free to give us a call. Yeah, my email is on there. My website's on there, and my telephone number's on there. So give me a call, look me up, say hello to me in Walmart or whatever, and we'll try to help you out.
And this is just a basic overview. If people want to go more in depth for their business questions, they can
Right.
contact you directly for that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Are there other recommendations that you have of people or resources that they should reach out to when starting a business and taking these considerations?
Yeah, well, I think this program that you're setting up is really, really exciting because there's not like a how to do this manual for somebody setting up
Right.
a business. Entrepreneurs are out there on their own. So if we can, like you're working on doing, setting up, I can give them some advice on legal entities, that kind of thing. Talking to an accountant would be a great idea. And then establishing a bookkeeping system within their office. Obviously, the famous one is QuickBooks, but there's others out there too. That's so important, is to keep track of that stuff in yourself. And we use that system, and it's great. So I like that. And then the other thing is that we haven't really talked about here. We talked about before the program began, and that's insurance. You've got to have an insurance agent that you know, an insurance agent that you trust, because all I'm talking about here is liability, and that's frightening. That, oh my gosh, I'm going to be liable for this. That's what entrepreneurship is all about. You're stepping out, you're taking some risk. It's really, really exciting, but it's also risky. So the way to minimize that risk and protect yourself is setting up the business like this, and then getting some good insurance to take care of yourself from that.
Awesome. And then one last question for you. How easy is it to change structures? Say they start out as a DBA and they decide a couple years down the road or even months down the road that they want to switch to an LLC or a corporation.
Okay. Well, anytime you're a sole proprietorship or a DBA, you're really not anything. You're nothing. So setting up a corporation or a LLC, it's the same. You just do it.
Go from one step to the next.
Right. If you want to switch from a corporation to an LLC, that's a harder decision, because if your corporation's been set up for a while and maybe you're tired of that double taxation issue, you can switch to an LLC, but what you're really doing is you're creating another entity, and then you're transferring the assets from one entity to another. It's not like you're just switching it. It's really two different people up there, and one is acquiring the assets of the other. And that's something you really need to work with an accountant, because if you might have tax consequences of, might be a taxable event, like you're transferring assets. You got to pay taxes on that. We haven't really done anything. Nothing's changed, but you might have some tax consequences on that. So that's really something to be aware of there too.
Okay.
So,
Very situational.
Yep, absolutely.